Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting when you go to college, right? You start deconstructing all these histories, right? So you're kind of told one story about how the world works, and then in college you start to say, yeah, but that's not quite what happened, and things get more complicated and so forth. And despite that, when you apply for a job as a professor, they say, well, tell us a story, right? Tell us a story about why you came to be this professor, right? Even though all we do is like deconstruct stories and show how the story isn't really how it happened. So I don't know. I think the best answer I can give is that when I was in college, I formed relationships with my religion professors, right? Those were the people that I kind of bonded with and looked up to as mentors and wanted to be like, right? Wanted to emulate, right? If I had instead formed a bond with like an engineering professor, my mom probably would have been a lot happier, right? Because she wanted me to go into a job that would make a lot of money straight out of college, not into the humanities. But I think that's really kind of how it started. And I like doing research. I like uncovering information that kind of nobody else knows. And I like that there is ideas of the supernatural and the mythic in religion, right? And I don't have to get into whether these things are really real or not, but people believe in them. And so I get to, talk about things like, demonic possession or jinn or even like aliens and things like that. So that also makes this work really exciting. If you want to be a professor, right, it's a very difficult job, right? Especially in the humanities, which is to say, it's very difficult to actually get someone to hire you nowadays, right? So professors have to produce research, and the nice thing about these topics is there hasn't been much serious research done on most of these topics because they're considered to be kind of marginalized or unimportant or whatever. So there's an advantage there, which is you get to be kind of first to the punch, right? You get to be the first person talking about these weird groups, right? The disadvantage is when a religious studies department is saying we're going to hire a new professor, should we hire someone who can talk about Christianity or Buddhism or this guy who does weird cult stuff? Right? Nobody wants to hire the guy who does weird cult stuff, right? Now they might say that could get some more students to take a religious studies class, but it doesn't look very serious, right? So a lot of the trick of doing this kind of research is you have to show what's important about it, right? Why does this matter to anybody? And I actually think that the work that I do does matter. Just to give one example, this summer I was a consultant in a death penalty case here in Texas. So in the state of Texas, they have the death penalty, and you don't have to just be convicted of a crime. The state has to show evidence of future dangerousness, right? So they have to make some argument that if we didn't give this person the death penalty, they might do this again. They're a dangerous person. And so this guy had been convicted of killing somebody. He was not a good guy. But the state said, well, did you know that when he was in prison, he read this book called the Satanic Bible? Right? And that book talks about human sacrifice and murder. So that's the proof of future dangerousness, and that's why we have to put this guy to death. And so the attorneys reached out to me and they said, "Can you talk about this? Because this is a life or death situation, right? We're determining whether or not this guy is going to be executed." And the prosecution doesn't really seem to actually know anything about the Satanic Bible or the Church of Satan. And also, this is setting a really dangerous precedent, right? If we start to say, criminals who belong to one religion are going to be executed, and criminals who belong to a different religion, maybe they won't be executed. That's probably not a good thing to have in our law. So I wrote an amicus brief, which is a formal kind of a letter that you send to the court to kind of inform them about something. And one thing that they didn't understand is if you look at the Satanic Bible, which is still sold in every Barnes and Noble in America, there is a chapter about human sacrifice. But if you actually read that chapter, it is a very long masturbation joke. It is actually a joke about, Ton LaVey, who wrote this piece, causing the death of, thousands of unborn babies, right? Which maybe is crude or dumb, but it's certainly not advocating killing people and human sacrifice. It actually says to never do that. So again, we might say this is sort of a weird topic, but that's an example of why this sort of work matters.